Use effect is one of the more commonly misused and maybe misunderstood hooks out there in all of React. It's been around for a long time, but unless you work in React or you're a primary front-end developer, you might still be confused on this hook. And I myself was too for a very long time. And that's because when we first got documentation and introduced to this hook, we were told that it was a replacement for the components lifecycle methods that we lost in the class-based components. Right now, we're looking at an example straight from the early React documentation around the use effect hook. Here, you can see I'm clicking a button. We're tracking how many times that button gets clicked, and we're also updating our browser title. I've thrown in this extra wrinkle of counting how many times we're going to render this component. And here you can see nothing is really performing out of the ordinary. We're rendering appropriately, and it's a pretty simple example where we're watching the state change of count within the use effect. So once the state variable of count changes, we're going to go ahead and update this title. Now, again, there's nothing terribly wrong with this, but this idea of equating the use effect into component lifecycle is the main problem. Now, the problem that I'm seeing developers work themselves into is when they start updating state within their use effect. So this is going to cause more renders and thus be a performance hit to your application. So let me demonstrate that real quick. Okay, so in this example, I've gone ahead and put my string into another state variable called title. I'm updating the document title right there on the initial render. And so here I'm going to click, I'll set the count to the new count. The count changes, that's going to trigger my use effect. And then I'm going to update my other state variable of the title with the count. So this might seem okay on the surface, but as I click, I'm getting the desired functionality of clicking once, my browser title updates each time that state updates. So it seems okay, but unless I'm watching how many times I'm rendering, you can quickly notice that we are doing twice as many renders as needed. So this is the big problem that's being littered throughout a lot of React applications. Now that we're back at our initial example, I want to talk about how we should probably be looking at this. Instead of equating a use effect to a component lifecycle, we should be looking at it through the lens of how React is actually rendering. If we actually look back at what an effect is, it's anything that's happening outside of that React context of rendering. So when I talk about the React rendering, I'm talking about when React is looking at the differences in your application and then committing those changes to the DOM, right? So this could be things like network requests, such as a REST call or a subscription to an observable, or even browser APIs that could be asynchronous. So when we look at this example, we should be thinking, do you actually need this use effect? We could easily do something kind of like this. If we think about, I know that clicking the button will cause a state change since it's going into my variable, thus we'll do the re-render, and so I can actually update my document title in that render. So I don't even really need the use effect. And these days, the React team, or those still there, have actually supplied a way better documentation explaining all of this and trying to detail when you might not need that use effect. They even have a nice little article about thinking in React, which I do think is kind of the difficult part of working in React, is you have to be balancing how does the React library work and how is it rendering and how can I time my changes to be the most performant they can be. I hope this helps. Have a good one.